The wind came howling in from the west, sweeping through the dirt lot outside the Hickory Bend Livestock Exchange like it was trying to erase the whole place from memory. Dust kicked up in angry spirals across the cracked ground, and the air smelled of sweat, rust, and old hay. Inside the auction barn, beneath a sagging roof and buzzing lights, a crowd of ranchers and traders filled the wooden bleachers, leaning forward in the stale air with a mixture of boredom and cold calculation. 17-year-old Julian Price sat in the back, hunched inside his oversized flannel jacket, trying not to be noticed. His dark curls were tousled from the wind, and his jeans had seen better days. He shifted in his seat, boots caked with the red clay of his grandfather's ranch. Everyone around him talked big: cattle weights, horse lineage, last season's market price. Julian just sat there, silent, watching, listening, waiting. He didn't belong here. He never had. The auctioneer, a wiry man with a sunburned face and a voice like gravel, slammed his hand against the mic and called for the next lot. "Now, folks, don't all rush at once," he chuckled dryly. "This here's a real prize, if you like your meat pre-tenderized." Laughter rippled through the barn. From the side gate, two handlers dragged in a horse, or what was left of one. The stallion stumbled forward, ribs like blades under a matted coat of mud and misery. His legs were shaking, tail tucked, ears back. His left eye was swollen nearly shut, and he limped with every hesitant step. Julian's breath caught in his throat. "Mustang stallion," the auctioneer announced, 3 years old, found near dead in the hills outside Rifle. No papers, no training, maybe good for glue if you're lucky. Another wave of laughter. Someone behind Julian muttered, "Ain't worth the rope it'd take to shoot him." But Julian wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the stallion. That look in the horse's face, it was wild, yes. But underneath the fear and fatigue, there was something else. A flicker. A fight. The same thing Julian saw in the mirror some days. A spirit battered, but not broken. Just misunderstood. He'd felt like that for years. Growing up with his grandfather Eli, a man carved from oak and gunpowder, meant there was no room for softness. Emotions were a weakness. Words were a waste. Julian had spent his whole life swallowing his feelings and learning to hide who he really was. And still, somehow, it had never been enough. But this horse, this trembling, half-dead thing in the ring, Julian saw himself in that. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow. "Any takers? Come on now, folks, let's move this skeleton." No one moved. Julian's hand went up. A hush fell over the crowd like a pin dropped in a church. The auctioneer squinted through the lights. "You, boy? What are you offering?" Julian swallowed hard. His voice cracked when he spoke. 500, gasps, then laughter. 500, someone sneered. "You ought to get your head checked." "Let the kid play cowboy," another said. "He'll be crying when that thing dies in the trailer." But Julian didn't flinch. His jaw was tight, his eyes steady. The auctioneer shrugged, clearly amused. "Well, hell, 500 it is. Going once, going twice." A pause. Julian could feel every set of eyes digging into his back. "Sold." The gavel came down with a clap like thunder. Julian stood slowly, heart hammering in his chest. He walked down the steps and into the ring, stepping through the sawdust in judgment. The horse didn't move when he approached, didn't even twitch. Just stared through him, like he'd given up expecting anything good from anyone. Julian reached up slowly, barely touching the rope around the stallion's neck. "Hey there," he whispered. "You're not done yet." He led the horse, barely able to walk, out through the side gate, past the gawking crowd and into the weak light of the late afternoon. Outside, leaning against an old red pickup, Eli Price stood with his arms folded and a frown so deep it looked chiseled in stone. His Stetson cast a shadow across his weathered face, but there was no mistaking the disappointment in his eyes. "You really did it," Eli grunted. "Spent your last damn dime on a corpse." Julian kept walking, one hand resting gently on the horse's neck. "He's not dead, not yet." Eli shook his head, spitting into the dust. "That ain't a horse. That's a heartbreak waiting to happen." Julian didn't respond. He couldn't. Not when his throat felt like it was closing in around his heart. They loaded Thunder, Julian had already decided on the name, into the trailer. The stallion collapsed the moment the doors shut behind him, and Julian, riding beside him on the slow drive back to the ranch, sat with one hand on Thunder's flank the whole way. As the sky turned gold behind the mountains and the ranch fence came into view, Julian whispered to the silent stallion, "They don't believe in us, but we'll show them, one step at a time." And so they arrived home. Two misfits, broken in body and bruised in soul. Neither trusted, neither wanted. But somehow, together, they had found the start of something that might just be worth saving. One cold evening, just as the sky turned to lavender with dusk, something changed. Julian was sitting in the straw, reading aloud. Thunder had been staring at the wall for 20 minutes, unmoving. Then, quietly, so quietly Julian almost missed it, Thunder stepped forward, one step, then another. His nostrils flared, his ears twitched. Julian froze. Thunder's nose extended slowly toward Julian's outstretched palm. It hovered for a breathless moment, then brushed against it. It wasn't long, it wasn't much, but Julian's chest swelled like it might burst. "There you are," he whispered, blinking back tears. "I knew you were in there." Back at school, things hadn't changed. Derek still jeered, the other kids still stared, but Julian had stopped caring quite as much. Because he had Thunder. Because for the first time in his life, someone had chosen to trust him back. One afternoon, Callie caught a photo of Thunder resting his head on the edge of the stall door while Julian leaned close, their silhouettes caught in golden light. She uploaded it to her small photo blog. The caption read, "Sometimes broken things find each other." The post didn't go viral, but it found the right people, and that made all the difference. The first few nights, Thunder wouldn't even look at him. Julian sat outside the stall in that old leaning barn, back pressed against a hay bale, legs crossed beneath him. He didn't bring a rope, he didn't try to pet the horse, he just showed up. Every day after school, like clockwork, with a book or a thermos of sweet tea, and just sat there in the dim light, reading aloud. Thunder stayed curled in the farthest corner, ribs showing, eyes rimmed with whites. He didn't eat much, didn't drink much either. Julian knew he was terrified, and not just of people. He looked like a creature that had given up on survival a long time ago. Still, Julian came. "I get it," he murmured one afternoon, flipping to Chapter 7 of The Call of the Wild. "People don't always mean well. Sometimes they leave scars even when they don't touch you." The horse didn't move, but he didn't flinch either. Julian took that as progress. At school, the whispers had returned with a vengeance. "You hear Julian Price bought a walking corpse?" Guess it's true. He'd rather talk to animals than real people. Derek Cole made sure no hallway went untainted. Julian found his locker covered in crudely drawn stick figures of a boy and a bony horse, with "Lover Boy" scribbled in Sharpie above. "Ah, come on, Jules," Derek said loudly at lunch. "You gonna enter that bag of bones in the next rodeo, or is he just your therapy pet?" Julian didn't reply. He just moved through the crowd like smoke. quiet and untouchable, though every insult clung to him like dust. It was a Tuesday when she finally spoke to him again. Callie Rivers, quiet girl, new to town, always scribbling in a notebook or snapping photos of things no one else cared about. She wore oversized sweaters with holes in the sleeves and walked like she didn't need anyone's approval. She found Julian in the library, hunched over a book on equine rehabilitation. "You really bought that horse?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Julian looked up, startled. "I saw you at the auction," she added, almost like an afterthought. "That moment you raised your hand. Everyone else was laughing, but you weren't." Julian nodded slowly. He was going to be sent off to slaughter. No one else even looked at him. "You saw something in him." "Yeah," Julian said softly. "I think I saw myself." Callie tilted her head. "Mind if I come see him sometime? I've been photographing abandoned places. He'd fit right in." The next day she came. Just after school, camera hanging from her neck, her boots kicking up dust as they crossed the pasture. When she saw Thunder, she didn't gasp or flinch. Instead, she lifted her camera, gently snapped a photo, then whispered, "There's something sad and beautiful about him." Julian smiled for the first time that day. They sat together for over an hour, not talking much, just listening to the wind creak the rafters and the distant bellow of cattle. Callie took photos from the stall door, while Julian read from a worn-out paperback. Thunder stayed curled up in the corner, but for the first time he blinked slower, softer. By the weekend, Callie had returned twice more. On Saturday, she brought 2 apples. "He probably won't eat it," Julian warned. Callie shrugged. "It's the gesture." She set one down just inside the stall door, then stepped back. Thunder sniffed it, backed away, then crept forward again and took a small bite. "See?" she grinned. "Small victories." Julian's grandpa still wasn't sold. "That horse is broken, boy," Eli muttered one morning, pouring black coffee into his chipped mug. "You're wasting time you don't have." Julian didn't argue. He just grabbed a bale of hay and headed for the barn. Inside, Thunder stood, head low but on his feet. That alone felt like a miracle. Julian didn't try to lead him out. He didn't throw on a halter or force interaction. He just laid a blanket near the stall door, sat cross-legged with his book, and started reading again, chapter by chapter, day by day. 2 weeks in, the shift happened. It was quiet, subtle. Julian had fallen asleep sitting upright, head slumped against the wall, book dangling in his lap. The barn was hushed except for the soft buzz of flies and the occasional creak of wood. Thunder moved, one careful hoof forward, then another. He sniffed the air, ears flicking uncertainly. Julian stirred, blinking the sleep from his eyes. Thunder's muzzle was inches from his hand. The boy didn't move, not a word, not a breath. And then, Thunder lowered his head and nudged Julian's fingers, light as a whisper. Julian felt everything catch in his chest. The barn, the world, even his own thoughts went silent. When he told Callie the next day, she didn't smile. She just nodded and said, "Told you he'd come around." They didn't talk about what it meant, not really, but both of them knew. In a town that never saw past the surface, they'd each found someone, or something, that understood being broken didn't mean being unworthy. The stallion and the boy, 2 quiet souls in a noisy world. And now, for the first time, they were no longer alone. The gym smelled like sweat and old sneakers. Julian hated it there. Not because of the basketballs thudding against hardwood or the echo of whistles, but because of the people who filled the space. Loud boys with bigger boots and louder mouths, the kind who measured strength by volume. He was sitting on the bleachers during PE, sketching thunder in the corner of his notebook, when the voice cut through the noise. "Well, well, look who's drawing his boyfriend horse again." Julian didn't even bother to look up. He knew that voice, Derek Cole, captain of nothing and king of cruelty. Always smirking, always watching for weakness like a hawk with blood in its eyes. Derek strutted up with two of his sidekicks, tossing a basketball from one hand to the other. "Tell me something, Price. That bag of bones you bought, does he even stand on 4 legs yet?" Julian exhaled slowly through his nose. "He does," Derek laughed. "You planning to ride him into the rodeo next month? You'll both drop dead before you make it to the gate." Julian closed his notebook. He stood up, not aggressively, just enough to look Derek in the eye. "Maybe I will enter the rodeo." Derek blinked, then grinned, wide and cruel. "You serious? You and that glue stick of a horse?" Julian didn't answer. He didn't have to. Derek's laughter followed him all the way out of the gym, but something had shifted. Julian's hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar rush of standing his ground. That night, back in the barn, Julian told Thunder everything. About Derek, about the rodeo, about how part of him wanted to prove everyone wrong, and part of him was terrified he couldn't. Thunder listened the way he always did, without judgment, without blinking. "I don't want to do this to prove I'm tough," Julian said, brushing down Thunder's flank. "I just want to show them that we matter, that you matter." In the weeks that followed, he began working Thunder through simple exercises, walking, trotting, circling the paddock with gentle persistence. It was slow, almost painfully so, but Julian had learned not to rush. He knew trust didn't grow in a day. Callie showed up with her camera as always, snapping moments like they were fireflies. Quiet, glowing proof that progress was real, even when it didn't feel like it. "You're really gonna enter?" she asked one evening, perched on the fence while Julian led Thunder through another wide circle. "I think so," Julian said. "He's not fast, he's not strong, but he listens, he tries." Callie smiled faintly. "That's more than you can say for most people." She jumped down and walked beside Julian as he cooled Thunder down. "You know they're going to laugh. The rodeo's not just some backyard show, it's Spring Valley. People train for that for years." Julian nodded. "Yeah, I know." There was a long silence. "Then why do it?" He looked over at her, brushing a sweaty curl from his forehead. "Because it's the only place around here where people actually look." The night before registration closed, Julian sat across from Eli at the dinner table. The only sound was the clink of silverware and the low hum of the radio. "I'm entering Thunder in the rodeo," Julian said quietly. The fork froze halfway to Eli's mouth. He set it down, slowly, deliberately. "You're what?" Julian straightened. "We've been working. He's stronger now. He's ready." Eli's eyes narrowed. "That horse ain't ready for a trail ride, let alone a rodeo arena." "You don't know that." "I know more than you do, boy," Eli snapped. "I know that arena chews people up for less." Julian swallowed hard. "Then let it chew me up." "But I'm doing it anyway." Eli stared at him for a long moment, the tension between them thick as wet rope. "You're gonna make a damn fool of yourself," he muttered. Julian stood. "Maybe, but I'll do it with him." Registration day arrived with gray skies and cold wind. Julian filled out the form with shaking hands. Name, age, horse, category, beginner exhibition round. At the bottom, he scribbled one line under the section marked Goal. He didn't write win, he wrote Finish. When Julian and Thunder walked onto the rodeo grounds for the first time, Heads turned. Not in admiration, but in amusement. Whispers trailed behind them like smoke. "That's the kid with the sick horse." "Is he serious?" "They look like they walked here from a disaster movie." Thunder paused just inside the gate, eyes wide, body tense. The air smelled like fear and sweat and metal. Horses neighed in nearby pens. Riders trotted by with polished saddles and custom boots. Julian put a hand on Thunder's neck. "Easy, boy. We belong here as much as they do." They didn't. Not yet. But he said it anyway, because maybe if he said it enough, it would become true. Callie met him near the practice pen, a coffee in one hand and her camera in the other. "They look terrified," she said. "So do I," Julian admitted. She handed him the coffee. "Fake it better." He smiled, grateful and nervous all at once. Near the edge of the grounds, Coach Mark Hendris stood with his arms crossed, cowboy hat tilted back. He'd heard about the kid with the rescue horse. The story had spread like wildfire online, thanks to one of Callie's photos catching traction on a local rodeo page. "Julian Price," Mark murmured to himself. "Let's see what kind of heart you've got." In the last light of day, Julian led Thunder through one final run across the empty arena. No obstacles, no crowd, just the sound of hooves hitting dirt and the rustle of wind in the banners overhead. Thunder moved with awkward grace, still shaky but stronger than before, still scared but willing. Julian slowed him to a stop, then leaned down, resting his forehead against the horse's neck. "Tomorrow's gonna be a mess," he whispered. "But I'm glad it's with you." Thunder let out a quiet huff. As night fell and the rodeo grounds emptied into shadows and quiet conversation, Julian looked up at the stars overhead. He wasn't thinking about winning. He wasn't thinking about Derek or Eli or any of the people who doubted him. He was thinking about the moment Thunder first touched his hand, the whisper of trust in a world that didn't believe in either of them. Tomorrow, they'd ride with that whisper, and that was more than enough. The morning of the Spring Valley Rodeo broke cold and bright, with a sky so blue it felt almost unfair. Julian stood just outside Thunder's stall, clutching the reins with trembling hands. The stallion stood still, head high, eyes alert. He wasn't shaking anymore, but he wasn't calm either. They both knew what was coming. The rodeo grounds were alive. Flags fluttered. Horses paced in trailers. Children ran between food trucks holding sticky cotton candy and plastic hats too big for their heads. But behind the color and sound was a familiar undercurrent: judgment, pride, and the relentless need to win. Julian felt like a fly caught in the gears of a machine he didn't belong in. "You sure about this?" Callie asked, falling into step beside him, camera hanging loose around her neck. She wore a denim jacket too big for her frame and boots that looked older than the both of them. Julian nodded, barely. "Number, but I'm doing it anyway." Callie grinned. That's how most brave stories start. They walked Thunder toward the warm-up area. The crowd grew thicker, louder. He caught glimpses of polished saddles, shimmering coats, and riders who looked like they were carved from championship posters. Then came the voice. "Well, I'll be damned." Derek Cole stood at the far end of the arena gate, leaning against a post like he owned the place. He wore a crisp button-up, brand-new jeans, and a smirk that hadn't changed since second grade. "I thought you were joking, Price," Derek called. "Didn't think you'd actually drag that scarecrow in front of a real crowd." Julian didn't respond. Thunder's ears twitched. Julian gently patted his neck. "Look," Derek continued, his voice rising with the crowd's attention, "I'll give you credit for guts. Takes some kind of stupid to show up with a ghost horse." Callie stepped forward, her eyes hard. "You done?" Derek raised his hands mockingly. "Hey, if he wants to humiliate himself in front of the whole county, who am I to stop him?" Julian led Thunder away without a word, but he could feel the laughter trail behind them like burrs in the wind. Back behind the holding pen, the world grew quiet. Thunder paced in his stall, nostrils flared, muscles tense. Julian crouched beside him, voice low. "You don't have to be perfect out there. Just be with me, like we practiced, one step at a time." Thunder turned his head, dark eyes locking with Julian's. It wasn't understanding, not exactly, but it was something close, something that said, "I'll try." Their names were called just past noon. Julian walked Thunder into the arena to a hum of murmurs and half-hidden snickers. The announcer's voice boomed overhead. "Up next in our exhibition round, Julian Price of Hickory Bend, riding Thunder." There was a pause. A rescue Mustang. A few chuckles rippled across the stands. Julian climbed into the saddle slowly, carefully, the way he'd practiced dozens of times in the quiet of the barn. From the sidelines, Callie lifted her camera, ready. Eli Price stood near the far gate, arms folded tight, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his old hat. The horn sounded. Thunder stepped forward and stumbled. A wave of murmurs swept the crowd. Julian's heart leapt into his throat. He steadied the reins, spoke low. "Easy, boy, you're okay, we're okay." Thunder caught himself, took another step and another. The crowd held its breath. The first obstacle was a low rail, a small jump, designed more for show than challenge. Julian nudged gently. Thunder hesitated, then leapt. He cleared it by inches. Not gracefully, not powerfully, but he cleared it. The crowd quieted. Obstacle after obstacle came. Tight turns, narrow passes, and timed gates. Thunder didn't fly through them. He moved like a soldier returning from war, wary, deliberate, but determined. By the halfway point, the murmurs had faded. The snickers had stopped. People leaned forward. And Julian, he was smiling. Not because they were winning, but because they were doing it. Together. As they approached the final turn, Derek's voice pierced the air again. One last attempt to break him. "You'll never belong here, Price." Julian didn't look back. He leaned forward, whispered into Thunder's ear. "They don't have to believe in us. We already do." And with that, Thunder galloped, not fast, not flawless, but free. For the first time, the finish line came closer, and they crossed it. Not to silence, but to applause. Genuine, thunderous applause. Julian slid off the saddle, legs shaking from the adrenaline and disbelief. Thunder stood tall beside him, chest heaving but steady. His coat was damp, his mane tangled, but his eyes, they were shining. From the crowd, Coach Mark Hendress stepped forward. "Kid," he said, offering his hand. "That was something else." Julian blinked. "Sir?" Mark smiled, tipping his hat. "I've been doing this a long time. Seen more show ponies than I can count. But that horse? He's got more grit than half the pros I've trained. I want to help you. You ever think about going pro?" Julian looked at Thunder, at the sweat-drenched coat, the scars that still marked him, the eyes that had once been full of fear. "He's not a trophy," Julian said. "He's my partner." Mark nodded slowly. "Then you already know what matters." That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast the arena in molten gold, Julian led Thunder back to the trailer. Callie snapped one last photo, Julian walking beside Thunder, both of them silhouetted against the fading light. They didn't win a ribbon, they didn't place. But the ride had changed everything. The video of Julian and Thunder's ride had been online for less than 24 hours when the messages started rolling in. At first, it was just a few shares. Someone's aunt, a local horse page, the rodeo's official Facebook. But then it spread, fast. A retired vet in Kansas shared it with the caption, "This is why we ride." A teacher from Ohio wrote, "Showed this to my class, not a dry eye." And then the morning news picked it up. Julian watched the clip on his phone, sitting on the back steps of the barn, the old wooden boards creaking under him. Thunder grazed quietly nearby, the morning sun warming his coat. He looked content. Eli stepped out of the house, holding 2 mugs of coffee, one black, one with too much sugar. He handed the sweeter one to Julian. "Thought you might need this," he muttered, not meeting Julian's eyes. Julian took it. "Thanks." They sat in silence for a moment. Just the sounds of the ranch waking up, the cluck of chickens, the groan of an old windmill, the distant moo of a restless cow. Eli cleared his throat. "You and that horse," he said slowly. "You made something out of nothing." Julian looked over, surprised. Eli's eyes stayed fixed on the pasture. "Didn't think it'd work. Didn't think you had it in you." A long pause. "I was wrong." Julian blinked, feeling the heat rise in his throat. Eli glanced at him finally, eyes softer than they'd ever been. "That's a damn fine horse. And you're not the same boy who came back from that auction." Julian didn't answer. He didn't have to. Eli set his coffee down, then did something that made the breath catch in Julian's chest. He reached out and hugged him. The attention didn't fade. If anything, it grew. A radio station in Denver called, then a podcast. Then a news crew showed up at the ranch with cameras and clipboards. But Julian stayed grounded, because Thunder did. Every morning, Julian still mucked the stalls, still read quietly beside Thunder, still walked him through the pasture like nothing had changed. Except everything had. It was Callie who first brought up the idea. They were sitting in the hayloft one evening watching the sun sink behind the hills, her camera resting on her knees. "You ever think about doing more?" she asked. "More what?" "More of this, what you did for Thunder. What you two have, there are other horses like him, and other kids like you." Julian stared at her, the words turning slowly in his head. "I don't know how to teach," he said finally. "You don't have to," Callie replied. "You just have to show up, like you always do." Rescue to Ride started small. Just a sign on the fence, hand-painted by Callie. Rescue to Ride, healing horses, healing hearts. The first to show up was a boy named Leo, 8 years old, barely spoke. He'd been in 3 foster homes and had a permanent scowl like he didn't owe the world a single word. Julian introduced him to Clover, an old mare with a limp and eyes that had seen too much. "She's stubborn," Julian told him, "but she listens if you do." Leo didn't answer, just stood there. But the next day he came back, and the day after that he brushed Clover's mane without being asked. By the end of the month, she let him lead her without a halter. One afternoon, Leo spoke. "She doesn't look at me like I'm broken," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Julian smiled. "That's because she isn't either." Word spread, and more kids came. Emily, whose parents were splitting up. Jace, who hadn't spoken to anyone since his brother died. Naomi, who wore hoodies in the middle of summer to hide the bruises. And with them came horses. Wounded, abandoned, scared horses. Julian and Thunder worked with each pair, quietly, patiently, the way they had learned with each other. The barn became more than a place to keep animals. It became a refuge, a place where kids didn't have to pretend to be tough. where horses didn't have to flinch from every hand, where trust was built breath by breath. One Saturday, a boy named Elijah arrived. He was small, maybe 9 or 10. Wouldn't speak, wouldn't look anyone in the eye. His foster mom said he had PTSD from a fire, lost his dog, lost his voice. Julian introduced him to Bandit, a gray gelding with burns down his side, a rescue from a barn fire. They stood in silence for 10 minutes. 20. Then Elijah took a step forward. Bandit didn't move. The boy reached out, touched the gelding's shoulder, laid his cheek against the scarred fur. No words were needed. That night, Julian cried in the tack room, quiet, deep sobs that came from a place he didn't know he'd been carrying. Not because he was sad, because he finally knew what purpose felt like. The town that once whispered behind Julian's back started showing up with donations, tools, feed, volunteers. The sheriff dropped by with a used saddle and 2 salt blocks. The diner owner organized a fundraiser and called Julian our local hero. Even Derek stopped mocking him. One day, he walked up to Julian near the feed store, hands in his pockets. "That thing you're doing," he muttered. "It's cool for the kids, I mean." Julian nodded. "Thanks." They didn't become friends, but that was enough. A year passed. The ranch didn't get any bigger, but the heart of it did. Julian stood in the pasture one evening, watching the kids ride, Leo laughing as he trotted Clover through a set of cones, Naomi brushing flowers into her pony's mane. Thunder stood beside him, head high, proud. "You did this," Julian said softly, resting a hand on his shoulder. The stallion snorted, like he didn't want the credit. Julian laughed. "Okay, fine, we did." The wind picked up, warm and sweet. Julian looked out at the field, at the barn, at the laughter echoing through the twilight. He wasn't the boy no one believed in anymore. He was the boy who believed first. And now, he was helping others do the same.